The late afternoon sun hammered the dry earth, turning the town square into a furnace as a small crowd gathered to watch a punishment no one truly wanted to witness. A thin young woman, dirt on her cheeks and fear in her eyes, stood on a wooden crate with a rough rope cinched around her neck. She had been caught with a loaf of bread tucked under her torn shawl, and the town sheriff, eager to make an example, accused her of theft that undermined order. She said nothing in her defense. Hunger had already stolen her voice. Her legs trembled, not from the height but from days without food. At the edge of the crowd, a tall, broad-shouldered widower named Arlen Vance watched with a quiet intensity that made others move aside. Arlen had lost his wife 2 winters ago and hadn't spoken much since, but cruelty always woke something fierce inside him. He saw not a criminal, but a starving girl whose ribs pressed against fabric that barely counted as clothing. As the sheriff lifted his hand to signal the crate's removal, Arlen's jaw locked. His boots cut across the dust in heavy, decisive steps. The crowd murmured, sensing the air shift. When Arlen reached the stand, he didn't ask permission. He drew his hunting knife in one fluid motion, slicing the rope clean through. The girl collapsed forward into his arms, gasping. Chaos erupted, shouts, confusion, the sheriff's outrage, but Arlen didn't flinch. Holding her gently but firmly, he said only 2 words. Spoken not as a request but a command carved from kindness. Eat first. Arlen carried the trembling young woman, her name, he still didn't know, across the square and into the small bakery at the corner where warm air rolled out like a promise. The owner, an elderly woman who had seen more winters than the town had fences, paused with her hands covered in flour. Arlen nodded once, a silent plea and a silent warning intertwined. Without hesitation, she slid a fresh loaf toward him. The girl's fingers hesitated at first, then clutched the bread with a desperation that made everyone else feel suddenly full in comparison. She devoured chunk after chunk, crumbs clinging to her lips like tiny witnesses to her suffering. Arlen stood beside her, arms crossed, keeping watch as if she were a wounded animal he had sworn to protect. The sheriff stormed in moments later, boots thudding, face red, demanding Arlen step aside and respect the law. But Arlen turned his head slowly, eyes like cold iron, and the room fell silent. No amount of authority could penetrate the presence that grief and hardship had built around him. The sheriff hesitated, swallowed, then snarled something about responsibility before leaving. When the girl finally slowed, her breaths steadied, and her eyes, large, dark, and shining with both shame and gratitude, lifted to meet Arlen's. "Why?" she whispered, her voice dry as old paper. Arlen didn't offer philosophy or comfort. He simply said, "Because someone should have helped you long before you needed to steal." She lowered her gaze again, gripping the loaf as though it were the last warm thing in the world. The walk to Arlen's waiting horse was quiet, except for the gentle crunch of gravel under their feet. The girl stayed close, almost afraid to lose the safety he radiated. At last, Arlen asked, "What do they call you?" She hesitated, as though names were luxuries she no longer deserved. "Lyra," she murmured. Her voice trembled as if saying it might summon someone she feared. Arlen repeated it under his breath, testing its weight, then helped her mount. The skies darkened as they rode out of town, a storm rolling in like a judgment delayed. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, shivering not from cold but from the memories clawing up her spine, memories she kept locked behind her eyes. She had been wandering for months, always hungry, always running. When Arlen noticed her trembling, he shifted his coat around her shoulders without a word. His ranch appeared as the first rumble of thunder echoed vast, quiet, and touched with the loneliness of a man who had stopped expecting companionship. As he helped Lyra dismount, she wavered, knees nearly folding. Arlen steadied her with a gentle grip on her arms. She stiffened, unaccustomed to kindness, but didn't pull away. Inside the house, he lit a lamp, its golden glow softening the edges of the world. Lyra stood by the doorway as if afraid the floor might reject her. "You're safe here," Arlen said, voice low but sure. Her eyes fluttered closed at the words. No one had spoken them to her in years. Outside, the storm finally broke, thunder shaking the windows as rain washed the dust from the earth. And for the first time in a long time, Lyra allowed herself to breathe. Lyra awoke to the smell of broth simmering on the stove and the sound of quiet footsteps. Her body felt heavy but warmer than it had in months. Arlen sat at the table, mending a leather strap by lamplight, his movements steady, practiced. When she tried to stand, a sharp pain stung her ankle, the result of the fall when the rope cut loose. Arlen noticed instantly. "Sit," he instructed gently, pulling up a chair near the fire. As he examined the swelling, Lyra held her breath, expecting rough hands, cold impatience, but Arlen's touch was careful, respectful. "You've been walking injured for days," he muttered. She blinked in surprise. He could read suffering like others read maps. When he handed her a bowl of broth, steam curling upward, she sipped slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "Where were you heading?" he finally asked. She stared into the bowl, tracing patterns in the rising steam. "Anywhere they wouldn't find me," she whispered. He didn't pry, but the tension in her shoulders told him enough. She wasn't just hungry. She was hunted. "No one will come here," Arlen said, tying the bandage securely. Lyra's eyes glistened. She had heard similar promises before, none had lasted. But there was something different in Arlen's voice, something anchored by a grief that had carved honesty into his bones. When he caught her watching him, he looked away, uncomfortable, as though unused to being seen, and she realized he carried wounds, too buried quiet, but no less deep. Days turned into a brittle rhythm. Lyra helped around the ranch as much as her healing ankle allowed, fetching water, folding blankets, sweeping floors she insisted were already clean. Arlen worked beside her in silent companionship that felt strangely comforting. Little by little, she learned to smile again, small and fleeting but genuine. But peace rarely survived long in a life like hers. One morning, as Arlen saddled his horse, he saw dust rising on the far road. 3 riders, moving with purpose. Lyra froze when she spotted them, dropping the bucket in her hand. Her breath hitched painfully. "It's them," she whispered, voice cracking. Arlen didn't ask who them was. He knew the look of someone fleeing men who believed hunger was a crime and power was their right. Without warning, Lyra backed away, panic spiraling. "I'll go, I won't bring trouble here. I can hide in the hills." Arlen stepped forward, catching her arm gently but firmly. "You won't run," he said. "Not again." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand, they'll hurt you if you stand in their way." Arlen's voice lowered to a steady, unbreakable calm. "Let them try." The riders thundered closer. Lyra's hands trembled so hard she almost couldn't breathe, and instinctively she reached for Arlen's sleeve like a child clinging in a storm. He didn't pull away. Instead, he positioned himself between her and the road, a living shield forged from loss, compassion, and quiet strength. The 3 riders halted before the ranch, their horses snorting clouds of dust. Their leader, a sharp-faced man with cruel, calculating eyes, glared at Arlen while ignoring Lyra entirely, as if she were livestock gone astray. "We're here for the girl," he said smugly. "She stole from us. Family, property." Lyra flinched, her fingers tightening around Arlen's coat. Arlen's eyes narrowed. "A person isn't property." The man smirked. "In this world, anything weak is." Arlen stepped forward, shoulders broad, voice dropping into something cold. "She's not going anywhere." The men exchanged looks, hands inching toward holsters. The sky above seemed to hold its breath. Lyra tugged on Arlen's sleeve, whispering desperately, "Please don't. I can't lose someone else because of me." But Arlen didn't move. He had buried a wife, survived storms worse than this, and he refused to let cruelty win again. In one swift motion, the lead rider drew his gun. Lyra gasped, but Arlen was faster. His own revolver appeared like lightning, aimed steady and unshaking. "Leave," Arlen warned. The tension snapped like overstretched rope. The riders hesitated, weighed their odds, and saw something in Arlen's stance, something unbreakable. With curses muttered under their breath, they turned their horses and thundered away. Lyra collapsed to her knees, shaking with relief and terror all tangled together. Arlen holstered his weapon and knelt beside her, his voice softening for the first time since they arrived. "You're safe," he said again. This time, she believed him. In the quiet that followed, Lyra felt her fear unwind thread by thread, though some knots stayed tight. She spent evenings by the fire while Arlen carved wood or repaired tack, their silence becoming a language of its own. Sometimes she would catch him watching her, not with ownership, not with pity, but with the cautious warmth of a man rediscovering a reason to stay alive. She told him pieces of her past in hesitant fragments. The cruel household that called her plain, used her as labor, and denied her food until hunger forced her desperate theft. Arlen listened, jaw clenched, fury simmering beneath calm. He shared nothing of his own grief, yet Lyra sensed it, the ghost of a love he had lost. The emptiness her presence filled without asking. As her strength returned, she helped with the animals, her laughter softening the ranch's long corridors of silence. One evening, while she kneaded dough in the kitchen, Arlen leaned against the doorway, watching her hands move with practiced gentleness. "You could stay," he said quietly, surprising them both. Lyra stopped, heart lurching. "I don't want to be a burden." Arlen stepped closer. "You never were." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any cruelty she had endured. For the first time, She let herself imagine a future not running, not starving, not afraid but living. Spring warmed the valley slowly, brushing color back into the land and into Lyra's once faded spirit. She walked without limping now, cooked without trembling hands, and spoke without fear of being silenced. One morning, as she fed the horses, she found Arlen waiting by the fence, holding something wrapped in cloth. Her breath caught when he unwrapped it. The rope what remained of it cut cleanly by his knife the day he saved her. But it wasn't a threat or a reminder of her humiliation. Arlen had woven the frayed ends into a small braided loop, transforming it into something that looked almost like a keepsake. "This saved your life," he said softly, "and you saved mine in ways you don't know." Lyra's eyes filled. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "What do I do with it?" Arlen met her gaze fully. "No hesitation, no shadows. Whatever you choose. But if you want," he took a breath, steadying himself, "you can stay here, not because you owe me, because this place feels different with you in it." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of new blossoms. Lyra stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her fingers brushing his as she held the braided rope. "I want to stay," she said, the truth of it settling warm in her chest. Arlen exhaled slowly, relief softening the hard lines of his face. Together they stood beneath the rising sun, two lives once broken, now bound not by hunger or fear or rope, but by choice, by a beginning neither had expected. And Lyra realized that the day she was left hanging had not been her end. It had been the moment the world finally gave her a reason to live.